Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to talk about Iran tonight with Kaveh Shahrooz. He is a lawyer, a human rights activist, a university instructor. He's a senior fellow at the McDonald Law Institute. Kaveh, is that correct?
Kaveh.
Kaveh, I apologize.
No
Welcome to
problem.
the show, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, you're from Iran. You're a person who studies Iran and what's going on. You, I understand, serve as a legal advisor to the Association of Families of Flight PS 752. You're a co-founder of the Iranian Justice Collective, an organization focused on supporting Iranian democratic aspirations. So you're pretty close to what's going on.
Yeah, I follow Iran very closely. Yes.
So tell me, what is going on? What's life like in Iran today? What are the Iranian people thinking about what's going on? What do you think about what's going on with the Israeli attacks?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, but I'll do my best. And what is going on in Iran is hard to answer in the past 24 hours because the Iranian regime has largely cut off the internet. So the access that I had to friends and family has been severely curtailed. But what I can tell you about what was happening beforehand is that the people I talk to, they're all very, very nervous. They don't know what the future will bring. They hear bombs falling around them. They don't know when the next one's going to hit or where it's going to hit. So there's a lot of nerves. But in talking to different people that I know, and also spending a lot of time on social media, reading what ordinary Iranians have to say, uh, they are incredibly angry, but surprisingly not actually at Israel. I don't hear a lot of anger directed at Israel for its bombing. I think there is a lot of anger directed at Iran's regime for having brought Iran to this point where it has to be engaged in this war. Pursuing absolutely useless, perhaps not useless, but an absolutely uh, detrimental nuclear policy and nuclear weapons policy has isolated Iran for over a decade, frankly. It has destroyed the economy, it's destroyed the hopes of a lot of people, and it has now brought us to war. They're also angry at the fact that Iran's regime has made, its antagonism with Israel over the Palestinian issue such a central part of Iranian life. Iranians are co-religionists, I suppose, with the Palestinians, and perhaps have some sympathy for the Palestinians. But the idea that somehow their lives should be dictated by what's happening in Palestine is just insane to a lot of people. And finally, I'm hearing just a lot of anger from Iranians about the fact that the regime has spent billions upon billions on defense. It has curtailed all sorts of civil liberties because of defense and so on. And yet it can't even do the very thing that it's supposed to do, which is to defend the homeland. It can't prevent Israel from gaining total dominance over the skies. It can't provide shelters for its citizens to go to seek safety. Air raid sirens are missing. So it hasn't done any of the things that you would expect a state anticipating war and frankly seeking war for so long. It hasn't done any of those things. So there's an incredible amount of anger at that regime, but also a lot of fear that the Israeli attacks, which so far I have to admit have been fairly precise. There's a fear that those might grow in scope, and Tehran or some other city might turn into Gaza, and I think that's everybody's absolute worst nightmare.
So let's take through these issues sort of one by one, if we could. Nuclear capability.
Mhm.
So you're strongly of the opinion that the nuclear work that Iran has been doing has been for the preparation of a nuclear bomb, not for non-military uses. And are you? Well, that's the first question. Is that what you think? And then, second of all, do you think that Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu are right that Iran is close to actually getting that nuclear bomb?
Yes, to both counts. I think Iran has certainly been enriching uranium with the purpose of a nuclear weapon. There is no reason, if you just want to have a civilian energy program, there's no reason that you need to enrich uranium to the degrees that Iran's regime has been enriching uranium. Iran is a energy powerhouse in terms of oil and gas, so there can still be a justification for moving towards nuclear energy, but that's the justification in the case of a country like Iran is limited. The fact that its nuclear program is not run by some civilian nuclear agency, but is run by the IRGC. The enrichment, as I mentioned, all these things point to the fact that there is something improper and there's something warlike about its development of nuclear technology. And in terms of being close, yeah, I mean, it's not just me. I mean, I think International Atomic Agency and others have said that Iran's been doing clandestine enrichment, that it's getting close. The breakout time is getting very, very close. Now, the exact amount, I mean, that's based on secret intelligence that the Israelis claim to have and others. So it's hard to know exactly how far they were, but I don't think anyone thinks it's a secret that Iran has been racing towards the bomb because it views the bomb as an insurance policy. It knows that it's unpopular in the region. It knows that it's unpopular with respect to its own population. And so it needs that insurance policy to protect it against a potential downfall.
You mentioned our IRGC. Can you explain what that is?
Sure, the IRGC is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It is a military force in Iran, but it's actually a lot more than that. So, for your listeners, I have to take a step back and say that Iran, unlike a place like Canada, doesn't just have an army. It actually has two armies. It has its regular traditional army, which is called the Artish. And then it's got the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And as the name suggests, it's not the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Its role is not to protect Iran, its role is to protect the Islamic Revolution. Its role is to protect the dictatorship currently in place. And it's an organization that began, it's an institution that began around the time of the Iran-Iraq War in the early 1980s. And over time, it's grown and grown. So now it has its own Air Force, it has its own Navy, it has its own intelligence agency. And more so than a military force, it is also a huge economic force in the country. So a lot of these IRGC generals and high-ranking officials, they're deeply embedded in the Iranian economy. They're deeply, deeply corrupt. It's almost impossible to have a successful business in Iran without the IRGC showing up and wanting a piece of the action. It's basically running a racketeering operation. And it's been responsible for much of the terrorism and the bad behavior of Iran's that you hear around the world. So be it the nuclear program, it's under their oversight, the funding of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, that's all done by the IRGC. The shooting down of PS-752, which is the Ukraine international flight in the year 2020, that actually had a lot of Canadians on board. That was done by the IRGC. So this is an organization that is deeply corrupt, deeply repressive at home, and responsible for a lot of deaths abroad. It's an incredibly dangerous organization. In Canada, thankfully, we have listed it as a terror organization, in the US as well. And it is really the power behind the clerics. It's the muscle behind the clerics. And it's one that we have to sort of oppose with all our might.
I had drinks with a Iranian citizen that's moved to Canada recently, and they were saying that the mullahs aren't religious; they're power oriented, and that the IGRC is really a vehicle to ensure economic power and wealth, not necessarily the continuation of Islam. It's not a religious organization. What do you think?
I totally agree with your friend. I think that analysis is spot on. The way I always describe it is that Iran, we think of it as a revolutionary state, as a religious state. It is none of those things. Iran is a mafia state. It has the veneer of religiosity, but a lot of these clerics, they no longer have much revolutionary zeal. They're not particularly religious. It's just kind of the tool they use to stay in power. Really, at the core, it is a regime dedicated to plundering the country. And if you look at the vast wealth of the upper echelons of Iran's regime, it tells you everything you need to know. What they're focused on is preserving their power. What they're interested in is preserving their wealth. And I think that should actually, to a large extent, guide our policy. I don't think this is a regime that's going to put up a significant revolutionary fight for advancing its ideology. This is a regime that's interested in self-preservation, and it will do anything and concede to anything and sign any agreement just to stay in power. And I think they're actually that can actually be used to our advantage.
Take a step back, if you could, and tell me a little bit about Iran. This friend of mine said that she thought that Iran was a Western country, that it was a very modern country, it was a very well-educated country, and that if it wasn't for the mullahs and the Ayatollah, that it would be a very good partner to the West. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I like your friend very much because we see eye to eye on a lot. Iran, people periodically, Westerners periodically travel to Iran, even though it's not easy to do. And what they often report back is, wow, I've never been treated so well. I've never seen such a pro-Western population. Iran is a strange place where its population is in some ways completely at odds with its government and its outlook. So Iranians before the 1979 revolution, Iran was still a dictatorship, a much less sinister one, a much less dangerous one. There was a monarchy in place. And Iran was westernizing very, very quickly. It was developing, I think it had the fourth or fifth largest army in the world. It was developing in terms of universities, in terms of businesses. And it was generally thriving, and a middle class was growing. And its orientation was completely Western. I mean, it was very closely allied with the United States and others. In fact, if there was a criticism of the previous regime that was made by the public, it's that it's too Western in outlook. Um, History being what it is, things went awry in 1979. There was a revolution, and a very anti-Western religious government came into power. They have dominated for the past 45 years or so, and they've really deeply repressed the population. But still, to this day, what you see is Iranians wanting to be uh, part of the Western world. They want their economy to develop. They want women and men to have equal rights. Um, and Iran, unlike a place like North Korea, for example, is not actually, despite the efforts of its regime, is not cut off from the world. So a lot of Iranians watch satellite television. They spend a lot of time on the internet. As you know, as many of you in Toronto would know, for example, there's a large Iranian diaspora that lives in the West and travels back and forth. So Iranians are exposed to a lot of Western ideas, and they want a piece of it. They want to be a part of it. But this is a regime that will not let them. So I think what they need is for this regime to be toppled so that they can rejoin the international community.
Do you believe that this war right now could lead to regime change?
I absolutely do, and I mean, it's a tough question to answer because regime change can mean a number of different things. But I think the Islamic Republic, as we've known it for the past 45 years, will not be left standing, a few weeks from now, frankly.
Will not be left standing a few weeks from now.
I think that's right. Yeah. I know it's a bold statement, but I stand by it.
That's a very bold statement. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back, and I'm going to talk about some of the military defense issues, and then maybe later on we'll talk a little bit about Iranian society and the mullahs and the Ayatollah and what we think is going to happen. Stay with us, everyone. This is going to be an interesting conversation tonight. Stay with us. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're talking about Iran, Israel tonight with Kaveh Shahrooz. He's a lawyer, human rights activist, a university instructor, and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He's a former senior policy advisor to Global Affairs Canada on international human rights policies, a graduate of Harvard Law School and the University of Toronto. He's had articles appearing in numerous different publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Politico, and the Globe and Mail. And he is a co-founder of the Iranian Justice Collective, an organization focused on supporting Iranian democratic aspirations. And we're very honored and lucky to have you with us talking today. Thank you so much. Let me talk for the next couple of minutes just about sort of the military aspects of this situation. So I understand that Iran has the second largest army in the Middle East, and that if you add in sort of some of the organizations, Hezbollah, Hamas, etc., that are either funded by or affiliated with Iran, it would end up being one of the most, largest military defense organizations in the world when you add it all up together. Are those people loyal to the Ayatollah? Are they loyal to the Iranian regime? What's going to happen if Israel attacks in a land-based, and even if this, air assault continues? What's the military going to do?
Great question. I'm largely going to speculate, obviously, but I think there are some things that give us some hints about what Iran's military might do. So first of all, yes, Iran is probably not probably, it is the second largest military in that region, but it's second by a long distance. I mean, Israel's military capabilities, as we've been seeing in the past few days, really dominate over Iran. And second, as you mentioned, Iran has had what it called a policy or a doctrine of strategic depth. What it meant was that it tried, obviously, to protect the home front, but it had these proxy forces, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, that were supposed to do some of its work and keep the enemies far away from Iran's soil. Now, what we've seen in the past year or so is that its proxy policy has largely been demolished. Hamas is degraded significantly. Hezbollah, with their exploding pagers, are really essentially a non-entity now, and they've declared actually in the past few days that they don't want to get involved. It's incredible that Iran's regime funded Hezbollah up to the tune of billions of dollars, and now when the moments come, Hezbollah has basically declared neutrality. So it's operating from a much weaker position. It obviously, as far as we know, yet does not have a nuclear weapon, so um, its military capabilities are far inferior to Israel's, as I alluded. In terms of what its military forces will do, and whether or not they will remain loyal. So I think by and large, the rank and file of Iran's military has no particular ideological affiliation with the regime, and it probably is not loyal. Iran has conscription, and so large segments of its armed forces are just average people that are drawn into the military and into the IRGC, and they don't want to be there, frankly, and they're there essentially against their will. So they're not going to display much loyalty. And Iran's regime is generally very unpopular with its population, so you would expect that. There is probably a certain small percentage of its armed forces that are loyal to this regime and they will fight. But as I mentioned before the ad break, Iran's regime is a mafia state, and that also not just the clerics, but also the upper echelons of its military forces. They are major economic players, and they're not interested in fighting an ideological battle. What they're interested in is staying alive and keeping their money. And so I think, my analysis is that the moment that there is an opportunity for them, or the moment it becomes absolutely necessary for them to turn on the Ayatollahs, to turn on the clerical regime, they will, if it means that they get to stay alive and perhaps keep their money. Um, and you see hints of this. I mean, Israel has been able to infiltrate Iran's upper echelons to a level I don't think I've ever seen the likes of which anywhere in the world. So with incredible precision, for the past year, Israel has been able to come onto Iranian territory, and it has been able to assassinate, the head of Hamas. It's been able to assassinate nuclear scientists in the past few days. It just within 24 hours, it took out the entire upper structure of the IRGC. You can't do that unless your people in the upper layers of the regime are willing to sell the regime out. They are not bound by some ideological belief. They're not bound by some religious belief or revolutionary belief. They can be bought off. And so I think they can be bought off for intelligence purposes. But I think that the next stage, as we look at regime change, they can be bought off for that purpose as well.
Tell me what you think about this strategy of assassination. It's a lot less damaging to the average citizen than bombs that would hit the cities. But it's kind of strange, isn't it? It's kind of a different strategy to so selectively go in and assassinate the top echelon of the military establishment.
Yeah. So I am of two minds about that policy. So on one level, as you mentioned, I mean it's much cleaner and much less harmful to civilians. I would much rather Israel take out the upper layer of the Iranian regime quickly and efficiently as it has done. I would much rather see that than to see Iran being leveled and turned into rubble the way Israel has done in Gaza, right? So in that respect, I think it's a good policy. But you have to think about the precedent that it sets. I am not shedding any tears for the leaders that have been killed off. These are people whose hands were just covered in blood. But I think if we enter an era in which governments can sort of at will just execute and assassinate the leaders of other countries, I think we're beginning to enter fairly dangerous territory.
Supposedly, President Donald Trump has said no to the assassination of the Ayatollah. Was that the right decision?
I will say I think it was well, again, one of those issues of which I'm of two minds. I think if he was to be taken out, this conflict would probably be over much sooner. And that's obviously something I'd like to see. I'd like to see the regime fall. I'd like to see them surrender quickly and with as little civilian casualties as possible. But the side of me that works on international human rights and is focused on accountability, that part of me says I hope that he stays alive long enough to see the regime fall, for him to be arrested and for him to be put on trial for his crimes.
The nuclear establishments, I understand, are primarily one that is deep in the earth. But then, there's been lots of speculation about several other establishments, maybe some that are actually not even publicized or known, maybe by Israel, but by no one else. How difficult do you think it's going to be to actually penetrate and destroy these nuclear establishments?
Good question. And honestly, I have to plead some degree of ignorance. I mean, I follow the news on this stuff closely, but I'm not a technical expert by any means. I do worry that taking out these nuclear facilities is going to be very difficult, and not just difficult, but also very dangerous. The worry is that there are certain nuclear sites where if they were to be attacked, there would be an environmental disaster. The Bushehr plant in particular, I think the feeling is that if it was to be hit, you would have a Chernobyl situation happening, and all of the Middle East would be affected. So, I mean, I really hope that the powers that be in Israel and in the United States have thought about this issue, about how to contain any potential fallout from this. But I think, Iran's regime has obviously deliberately chosen these sites and put them where they've put them just to make them inaccessible and to make them dangerous. So Israel has sometimes in the past tried to disable them with other means through computer viruses or killing nuclear scientists that have been working on these sites. So I hope it follows that policy rather than to blow up nuclear sites that can do tremendous damage to civilians for generations to come.
So two of the different approaches that I've heard are using a B-2 bomb and a cluster bomb that only the United States has on those B-2 bombers that could penetrate deep enough to destroy that facility. Or Israel would have to use ground forces to attack and take it over. What do you think about those two options?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you're asking really good questions, but ones that are probably a little bit above my pay grade. I don't want to see foreign troops on Iranian soil. I was born in Iran. I lived there for many years. I'm an Iranian Canadian. I love both countries immensely. And I don't want the sight of Iran being invaded. Um, but really, first and foremost, my concern is with Iranian civilians, and I want them to stay safe. And as I mentioned, there is the risk of environmental contamination. So I just hope that whatever policy is followed is the one that thinks about the long-term impact on civilians and tries to minimize harm to them.
There has also been some attack of oil facilities, industrial facilities, and speculation that there might be more to economically devastate the economy. What do you think about that strategy?
Um, that I can get on board with that a lot easier than some of the other things that are being floated as ideas. I think Iran's regime, as I've mentioned several times now, is a kleptocracy, and its main source of money is the oil industry. And if the oil industry can be crippled temporarily so that the regime falls and it can't provide for its people and gets the people on the street, I think that's a good thing. Frankly, I wish that Western governments had listened to Iranian activists some years ago. We have been for years saying, establish a strike fund for Iranian oil workers to go on strike. It's the best way of defeating Iran's regime is to shut down its oil industry. And if we could get the workers to stop working, that is the thing that will cripple this regime. I wish they'd listened to that, but they have not. Militarily, I hope obviously they don't do permanent damage to Iran's oil industry, because hopefully there is an Iran after the Islamic regime, and it's a free one, and it will need its oil industry. But for the moment, if it harms the Ayatollahs, I think I'm on board.
I understand, ironically, that there's a delegation of Iranians in Russia right now, and they were talking about the future of Russia Iran cooperation. What's the impact of all this on Russia, and if on the Russian Ukraine war?
Yeah, so Iran has been providing drones to Russia to use in its conflict against Ukraine, and it has a fairly active, but I would say one-sided relationship with Russia, in the sense that Iran allows Russia access to it. It has co-created one of the nuclear sites with Russia. It does economic deals with Russia. The idea being that Russia is supposed to support them. It was working, and it was supporting Iran in Syria until the last moments of Bashar al-Assad's government. And The reason I say it's largely one-sided is because now, in its moment of need, Russia, for the most part, has just pulled back and said, there's not much we can do. I think the mullahs in Iran were really counting on Russian support at this moment, and Russia has simply not delivered for them.
Hezbollah is not coming to the table. Russia's not coming to, is anyone coming to support Iran?
Well, one of the things about running a state that's so belligerent, as Iran's regime has done, is that you don't have a lot of allies. And they thought that they could buy allies through funding of Hezbollah and Hamas. But obviously, over the past couple of years, their powers have been so degraded that they are not of much help. And they've declared neutrality because simply they can't do much. Hezbollah can't do much. And Russia is so bogged down in its own conflict in Ukraine. And frankly, it doesn't perhaps consider Iran as a valuable strategic asset. So yeah, no, I don't think Iran has much military support. It has again, sort of a good relationship with the other major authoritarian state, which is China. But China doesn't want to get bogged down in this battle either. So I don't think there's really going to be anyone coming to the Iranian regime's aid at this moment.
This friend that I had drinks with said that the government was very unpopular, but 10 to 15% of the Iranian population supported the government, and that is several million people. And so that's a sizable, even if it's only 10 or 15%, it's a very sizable minority of the population. So that's one question I have for you, if you agree with that and if that's true. And then the second thing is that she said that one of the mistakes back in the time of the Islamic Revolution was that that by attacking Iran, what ended up happening is people became loyal to their country. They become nationalistic. They became patriotic, and that she worried and sent me by email a video shot by someone in Tehran of what was going on, where the individual was saying exactly the same thing, that these attacks actually might do the opposite, that rather than have people turn against the regime, will have turned people toward support for the government and have nationalistic, patriotic attitude. So I wonder if you could address those two questions, sir.
Sure. So in terms of support, yeah, I agree. I mean, it's hard to know exact numbers, but I think, 10, 15, 20% sounds about right to me in terms of the actual base of support that Iran's regime still has. And yeah, I mean, that's not an insignificant number. And not only that, I mean, it's 10, 15% that has weapons and is willing to fight to defend this regime. Now, where I think Iran's regime is incredibly weak with respect to its own base is two things. One, it has not been able to materially provide for them. And it's only getting poorer, and it's going to be even less able to feed them, to send their kids to school, to provide the things that they need to function. And the other thing is, I suspect that these people are the regime's base is going to be incredibly angry at them. It's probably already incredibly angry at them, because for 4 decades it's talked about resistance against the United States, the Great Satan, and Israel, which they call the Zionist entity. They've talked about defending, Iran against these outside forces. They've talked about attacking these outside forces and the fact that we're gonna fight them and we're gonna defeat them. And when the moment has come, in a matter of days, Iran has been shown to be a complete paper tiger. And I think the base is now going to look at the leadership and say, you sold us a false bill of goods. You were not prepared for this war. Why should we trust you? And I think the supreme leader is kind of in a bind. If he actually agrees to a nuclear deal at this point, if he surrenders, then he's going to have to answer to his base, and he's going to be immensely unpopular with his own people. Now, with respect to the kind of rallying around the flag phenomenon, that's something that you hear about. People speculate about it. Frankly, in the last few days, though, I haven't seen examples of it. I mean, I have seen people saying that they support the Israeli action. I've seen Iranians say this. And I've also seen Iranians say that they oppose both the regime and Netanyahu and the Israeli action. So I've seen these. What I have not seen are people that were previously opposed to Iran's regime turning around and saying, well, because of these bombings, in light of this attack, I'm going to support this regime. That phenomenon, it is, in theory, I suppose it's possible, but I just have seen no evidence of it. So I think the Iranian public is so disgusted with this regime and so tired of this regime and wants it gone so badly that they are not rallying around, certainly not around this government and this flag.
We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes. We're talking about Iran and have someone with us, a guest with us that knows this situation in great detail. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're talking about Iran and the Israeli attacks on Iran and their nuclear establishments right now with Kaveh Shahrooz. He's a lawyer, human rights activist, a university instructor, and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He is the co-founder of an organization called the Iranian Justice Collective, an organization focused on supporting Iranian democratic aspirations. Kaveh, given that background, you obviously are well familiar with a lot of these different treaties that have been negotiated and signed. So I got to ask you, how did we get to this situation? Some people have said this is all Trump's fault because he ripped up the agreement that Obama drafted. Some people said Trump was right to rip up those agreements. What's your sense of things, sir?
My sense is that the JCPOA, the nuclear deal signed by Obama, was a very, very bad deal. It had a sunset clause that allowed Iran to pause its nuclear activity for a few years and then resume it. And it had loopholes. And what it did was it allowed the United States government to lift sanctions on Iran as long as it was, complying with that fairly weak treaty. And when it lifted sanctions, it delivered billions of dollars in cash to Iran's regime, allowing it not to put that money to work for its people, but to funnel that money to Hamas and Hezbollah and help them build tunnels under Gaza and do things of that nature. So I think it was a very, very bad deal, and it should not have been supported. So I don't often have kind things to say about Donald Trump, but I think he was right in his analysis about this particular treaty. But I think the problem with Iran policy is frankly not the JCPOA. I think it's just for far, far too long, the international community just did not take the threat of Iran very seriously. They thought that it was a regime that could be talked to, that it could be bargained with, that it could be brought into the international fold. But I think from day one, I want your listeners to remember, Iran's regime came onto the scene by taking hostages for 444 days. It took diplomats as hostages. That was its opening act on the international scene. And it has been hostile to the international community ever since. It's bombed all the countries in the region. It has carried out bombings as far away as Argentina, where it bombed a Jewish community center. So it has shown itself to be an enemy of the Western world and the liberal democratic order for 4+ decades. And I think the time to confront it was much, much earlier than this. I think we were fooled into thinking that perhaps a more reform-minded government in Iran could be found and they could be our partners. So that's, you started your question by saying, how did we arrive at this? I think we arrived at this by misunderstanding what Iran's regime was about and misunderstanding just how awful they are and how they do not respect the international order, and they don't respond well to positive incentives. What they tend to respond to is pressure and force.
I saw this one report, and I have no idea if it was right or wrong, but said that one of the problems is that the United States has played too much of a role in the history of Iran, particularly, prior to the revolution, in supporting the Shah and meddling in Iranian politics. So what's your sense of sort of has the United States and has the Western world sort of created some of these problems?
I think this is one of the, it's incredibly complicated, and all sorts of historians and analysts will have different takes on this. So I think people often point to the original sin being 1953, when the United States and the UK supported the return of the Shah to Iran in what some people believe was a coup and some people believe was the rightful return of the Shah to power. There was a power struggle between the Shah and his prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, who had nationalized the oil. The US and the UK covertly intervened and they brought the Shah back. Now, I think that was a very complicated situation. I think the US was very right to worry that Iran could fall to the Soviet Union if the Shah was not aided. I think that was a realistic analysis. What they did not foresee was that the Shah would return and he would close all available sort of space for civic participation and political participation. And the only place where people could congregate, the only people where they could organize politically was the mosque. All other parties were banned. Any other political activity would land you in jail. And yeah, I mean, I think the United States, regrettably, I think, didn't push the Shah hard enough, early enough in his reign to open up some space for democratic political activity. I think if that had happened, you would not have seen the 1979 explosion and Islamic Revolution. I think you might have seen a development of Iran along the lines of countries like South Korea, for example, which went through a period of dictatorship but grew out of it and became democracies.
Iran doesn't appear to have any friends in the area. And maybe from a simplistic standpoint, a lot of us in Canada probably thought that these Muslim countries would have been friendly to one another and supported one another. But a war with Iraq and certainly Egypt, Saudi Arabia, etc., aren't supporting Iran. Tell me why.
Uh, well, Iran has not been in the habit of making friends from day one. So one thing your listeners need to know, and hopefully they know this already about Iran, Iran religiously is Muslim, but it's a different type of Muslim. It's Shiite Muslim. But the rest of the Islamic world is largely Sunni Muslim. And this is a big split, actually. To the outsiders, it doesn't seem like much, but it actually is a fairly fundamental split in the religious world. And Iran, from day one, has not only been opposed to the United States and Israel, it has also talked about other Arab governments as being puppet regimes of the US. So it has been at loggerheads with Saudi Arabia for 4 decades, with Egypt. Part of their anger at Egypt was the fact that Egypt signed a peace treaty with Israel. It tried to meddle in the affairs of all the countries in the region. It obviously fought with Iraq. Now, in fairness, that attack was actually launched by Iraq against Iran. So that's the one that I don't blame Iranian politicians for. And it has made life hell for a lot of Arab citizens. So if you were to talk to the average Syrian, what they would say is, Iran's regime came and destroyed our country. It held up Bashar al-Assad, and it helped Bashar al-Assad destroy his country and kill many, many thousands of civilians. And it's just had this effect in Yemen and elsewhere. So there are a lot of angry people looking at Iran saying, you are the source of our misery. And Iran has stood in the way of peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. It's just funded and supported some of the most radical elements across the Muslim world. And of course, there's, those countries are now looking with glee at the regime struggling and perhaps falling.
Looking with glee. Really?
I think so. I think the Islamic regime in Iran has been nothing but trouble for the neighborhood. I think a lot of these Arab and Muslim governments in the region now want to normalize relations with Israel. They want to kind of get on with it. We're seeing significant reforms happening in Saudi Arabia, and Iran's regime has been the holdout. So I think they will be very happy to see Iran's regime go.
So this war is a week old. Some people think it's a lot longer than that because it started on October the 6th, October the 7th. But this attack is a week old. Where do you see it going? What do you think is going to happen this weekend, next week?
Yeah, it's hard to predict. I mean, I think there's some possible scenarios that could play out, and frankly, none of them are good for Iran's regime. So I don't see any scenario in which Iran's regime ends up prevailing as a result of this. So here are some possibilities. One possibility is the complete capitulation and surrender of Iran's regime in its current form, and then it will be very, very weak. It will have an angry population. It will have a base, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, that will be very, very angry at the clerics and the IRGC, and so I think it will, it may be able to live on and limp forward for a few months, years, something like that. But I think the regime will ultimately fall. The other possibility is a complete defeat of this regime and sort of a military occupation. I hope it doesn't come to that. There could be a coup. I dread the possibility that there could be a civil war with different ethnic groups wanting to pull in different directions. The one possibility that is a good one, the one that I'm working sort of very, very hard to, bring opposition together so that this possibility comes to fruition, is the idea of a popular uprising. So Iran's regime has been severely weakened now. If there is a pause in the fighting, if there is an ability for people to take to the streets, I think there is enough anger that this regime will be toppled and a democratic secular government will hopefully take its place.
I think some of the biggest fear in the United States, and you saw this in the Senate discussions just the other day, is exactly what you're talking about, sort of the day after, and what's going to happen, and people concerned about a repeat of Afghanistan, where you had the U.S. and other forces had to stay in there for 2 decades, or Iraq, where they thought that there would be a civil society that could take over, and that took a long, long time to come to fruition. you are more positive. You think that there could be a civil uprising. You think that there is a group of people that could take over the society.
I think so. I'm devoting all my time and energy these days to making that happen. Um, Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran in 2025 is not Afghanistan. It's not Iraq. Iran has a strong civil society. Iran has a um, democratic tradition. The first revolution for democracy that happened in the 20th century was an Iranian revolution in 1906. It succeeded briefly and it was ultimately defeated. But this aspiration for democracy has existed in Iran for a really long time. Iran has active human rights groups. It has people that are very familiar with how the West works through exposure, and it has a very successful and integrated diaspora. So all of that, I think, all of those things point to the fact that if this regime falls, democracy could well come. I think that's what people are yearning for. 2 years ago, you had this massive uprising in Iran, the slogan of which was "Woman, Life, Freedom." I mean, people seek women's equality, for example. So all those things, I think, put together with the right structure, with the right people at the table, I really do foresee a liberal democracy taking hold in Iran.
Is there something that people around the world, not just the political leaders that are engaging in this military attack, but just people should be doing in this regard?
I think what people should be doing is pushing their democratic governments to not throw the Islamic regime a lifeline. I think the Islamic regime needs to die. And they need to push their governments to ensure that what comes after the Islamic regime is a democratic one. So a real respect for human rights, respect for democracy and the rights of women. That's what I'd like to see. And I'd like them to obviously, especially the citizens of Israel and the United States, to push their governments not to target civilians. I think that's really the key point that I want to stress. There is a fair bit of goodwill for the United States and Israel at this point in Iran because they think that those governments are taking out their oppressors. I think that mood will change if Israel targets civilian areas or if the US gets involved and it starts hitting civilians. So I think it's really, really important to keep this attack targeted on regime figures and regime institutions, and to ensure that some democracy takes hold afterwards.
We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've got Kaveh Shahrooz with us tonight, an Iranian Canadian who's got some really strong and educated points of view of what's going on. Kaveh, you talked about not giving the Iranian regime a lifeline. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, said that he had invited them and they had asked to come to the White House, and he invited them to come to the White House, and they were welcome to come to the White House. Is that giving them a lifeline, and is that a mistake?
I think that's 100% a mistake. I think signing a new nuclear deal with Iran that allows them to stay in power is a mistake. I think inviting them to the White House certainly is a mistake. I think the goal of the international community, the stated policy of the international community, should be regime change in Iran. This is a regime that is utterly illegitimate. It has no support. Not it has no support, but it has very little support at home. It's been incredibly oppressive. It has killed tens of thousands of people in the country, and it's been nothing but a menace abroad. So what I'd like to see is for the United States and other countries to adopt a regime change policy towards Iran.
If the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, called you up and said, what do you think I should do, Kaveh? What would you tell him?
It's funny you asked that because I was just finishing up an op-ed about this, which I hope to get published in the next day or two, advising Prime Minister Netanyahu. One, the advice is do not hit civilian targets. Make sure that you do not squander the goodwill that exists for Israel at the moment. That's point one. Point two, do not go in the direction of trying to partition Iran among different ethnic groups. That's just a recipe for a civil war in that country. And third, don't try to pick Iran's future leaders. I think any leader that's seen as a puppet of Israel or the United States will be seen as illegitimate, and that will lead to further conflict. But Israel, United States, Canada, and others can play a very important role in bringing Iran's opposition together. Iran's opposition is very fractured. They all want democracy, but they can't seem to work together. But I think Western governments and Israel can bring these opposition groups together, force them to compromise, and then they can present a united democratic alternative.
If Ayatollah Khamenei called you up and set him on the ropes, my country's under attack, I don't know what to do, what would you tell him to do?
I would say surrender immediately and spare your people. You've done nothing but cause them misery for, the 46 years that your regime has been in power. I would say surrender immediately and fly to The Hague to stand for trial.
What do you think is going to happen? What do you hope is going to happen?
A few minutes ago, I gave you the bold prediction that this regime will not last long. That is my position. I don't think this regime will last long. So that's my prediction. I think we are going to see regime change. What is my hope is that we're going to see regime change and we're going to see that followed by democracy. That is not the only possible outcome. There could be much worse outcomes. But the one I like to see is for a democratic, secular regime to take hold in Iran and for Iran to once again join the international community.
And if that's your hope and what you think is going to happen, what's the biggest impediment or what's the biggest thing that could change it? Is it giving the Ayatollah and the regime a lifeline and negotiating a ceasefire agreement or something like that?
Yeah, I think two possibilities. A ceasefire that leaves the regime in power would be an absolute disaster because I think what they will do is they will then turn inward and just absolutely crush any sort of opposition that might exist. The last time Iran signed a peace deal was in 1988. It signed a peace deal with Iraq. And the first thing that it did was then it turned around and massacred all its political prisoners just to ensure that there was no sort of uprising as a result of that as a result of that peace treaty and as a result of their perceived weakness. So I would hate to see the regime get a lifeline like that. But the other thing that I deeply worry about is the possibility of a civil war being fomented by outside powers. They might do the miscalculation of thinking, well, that will keep Iran weak and keep Iran from meddling in the affairs of other countries. But I think that's what we've seen is civil wars tend to spill out. I mean, aside from the fact that they're an absolute civilian disaster and human rights catastrophe, they also geopolitically are not advantageous to nearby countries. Things don't stay contained. They fan out and they tend to engulf the entire region.
How is history going to judge Benjamin Netanyahu?
Just with respect to Iran, I mean, I don't want to talk about other parts of his policy. Just with respect to Iran, I think I would judge him as being clear-minded about the Iranian threat in a way that others have not been. And I think if he keeps his current policy, again, I want to keep stressing this point, if he does not widen the scope of his attacks to hurt a lot of civilians, I think history with respect to this one issue will judge him very kindly.
Thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I hope we can keep in contact, and if there's big developments, maybe have you back. And I look forward to reading your op-ed. If people want to follow you, what's the best way to do that?
On Twitter/X at Kshahrouz, Kshahroz.
Thanks so much. That's our show for tonight, everybody. This is obviously one of the biggest things, if not the biggest things happening in the world today. And, I met my best friend in when was it? 1979, Iranian Revolution, watching the TV of what was going on with the kidnapping of those people, those diplomats, Ken Taylor, and everything that Canada did in regards to assisting the escape of what was going on. And it's hard to believe that that's how long ago it was that the Iranian Revolutionary regime took over Iran, and the Ayatollah Khomeini took over control of that country. And that prior to that, the Shah was in control, and it was almost a Western country. Gosh, was that 1979?
Most.
Hard to believe. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Brian.